Hi everyone, and welcome to our webinar today, where we're going to be looking at how Clyde and Co are transforming their business on a global scale. Welcome very much to everybody. We're going to allow people to come into the room before I do some introductions. Just as a quick preface before we do introductions, we've all got slight degrees of coughs and colds. We've said that we'll be transparent about that, but try and keep coughing and sniffing to a minimum. And share in the chat if you also have a seasonal cold, and we can bond over that. Joining me today are Clyde & Co.'s Head of Legal Delivery and Innovation, Nick Roberts. Hi, Nick.
Hello, Caroline.
And LexisNexis Enterprise Solutions General Manager, Andrew Lindsay. Hi, Andrew.
Hi, Caroline. Hi, Nick.
It's great to have you with us today. We're going to be talking about Clyde & Co.'s response to so as many law firms have disparate silos, different case management systems through process of acquisition. We're going to be looking at Clyde & Co.'s journey in terms of consolidation and being able to provide data analytics to its clients. As you know, Clyde & Co. has a large presence in the insurance market. They've used LexisNexis Visualfiles for years across various practice areas, and they've got that's for their volume insurance handling, insurance claims handling. They've, as I said, consolidated multiple case management systems into Visualfiles following a merger with BLM. But for the last 2 years, they've been working with LexisNexis on its web-based matter management application, Everyfile. That's really what we're going to be talking about. That's the backdrop. We're going to be talking about the collaboration, the client need and demand, and the results so far. And the collaboration is a really interesting point because that's as much almost an interesting part of the story, because in as much as Lexis has needed to create the technology, Clyde & Co has collaborated with them in terms of some of the technological and cultural issues that surround these types of transformation and innovation efforts. Thanks very much for saying hi in the chat. Make sure your chat's enabled. We're going to be taking questions throughout this webinar. The guys have said that they're happy with that. So please, and we've got a couple of questions already that people have sent to us. So please do make your voices heard. Nick, do you want to talk to me about, I've sort of touched on a very speedy backdrop to the project. Talk to me about, from in your words, in terms of the sort of effectively the problem that you were faced with, as it were.
Yeah, I think, as you say, we work a lot in the insurance industry, and for those clients, we do a range of work, anything from volume work to advisory up to the more complex style matters. And we have a lot of what you would call matter management systems and data capture systems, and a variety of them that aid us with that work and enable us to deliver the product to our clients. But as we sort of reflect on what we need as our tech strategy going forward, obviously it makes sense to bring all of those different matter management systems together onto one platform. I don't think we need to rehearse why that makes sense. It's an obvious point to make, but that's the first step as to what we are trying to do there. But as we started to go on that journey, I think we started to realize, as you've pointed out, sort of cultural challenges. So we've worked with Visualfiles for many, many years. And it's a great system, but in order to take Visualfiles, which within our organization anyway is definitely known within the volume space rather than outside of that volume space, trying to get that sort of penetration, if you like, across into those other areas, into that advisory and up into the more complex matter management space, we needed to work with, in this case, LexisNexis, on a solution that was a little more flexible. So alongside our journey of sort of consolidation into Visualfiles, we also said, well, how are we going to make this an appealing platform? How are we going to make the capture of data as efficient and effective as possible?
Yeah, thank you for that. And I know you said we're not going to delve too much into why that's important, but it's fair to say that from a client perspective, it used to be okay to just deliver law, but now that's, even at the more complex level, they're expecting it to be law plus data.
Yeah, and I think to us, it's irrelevant really what you are delivering, whether you are in the insurance space where there's a big demand for management information. You're running big portfolios. If you had a provider running a portfolio for you, you'd want not just to understand individual cases. You're actually more interested in the portfolio itself. What are the trends? What are the issues? What is it we need to worry about? What might be coming down the line? And so being able to consolidate all that data together is really important. If you switch that to the other end, to the end where we're doing more complex matters, perhaps they run multi-jurisdictional or they run across a number of years, you're there looking for where are you in the matter, where are you up to, that sort of being able to go in and have a look at sort of dashboard style, but all of that has to be powered by data. And if that's not either automated, then it becomes a huge manual exercise. And if it's not actually coming out of similar systems in a similar structure, then there's a manual exercise to make it all look the same so it can go into a platform. So the reason why we're focusing on that sort of consolidation is it provides that more sort of one way of working, one source of data, one source of the truth, and the really ability, nothing's cheap in the tech world, really. And therefore, actually, our ability to make sure when we invest in automation, robotics, and where we're doing that, actually, that's within one system, not across 10 or 12 different systems. You've got to make that that investment count. You've got to make it worthwhile.
And just before we come on to Andrew talking about your side of the coin in terms of the development and thinking behind it, so it's also fair to say, a lot of the work you're doing is in litigation, Nick. We'll come on to just slightly deeper dive, but it's interesting, isn't it? Because you've got a lot of the stuff I write about is in the contract space.
Yes.
And it's great to see that this applies as much in litigation as in corporate contract space.
Yeah, we have within our firm we have a significant corporate presence, and I always note how much technology or legal technology is available for them. They're almost riches of technology they could adopt and use and sort of to support what they do, both internally and actually in collaboration with clients and third parties. When you switch towards the litigation side, though, a lot of that technology, a huge amount around client data handling, I would call it, e-discovery and a lot around sometimes case preparation, those sorts of things, but they tend to be sort of pinpoint solutions to a particular issue. There's very little that sits across the top of it all. Whereas when you look at it, there is still a structure that sits behind litigation. There is a way in which you can start to say, well, actually, how can we, got to be very careful, don't go into too much detail, and we'll probably come on to it later, but you don't want to sit there controlling, right? The challenge really in litigation, I think, is you don't really know where it's going to go all the time. So you've got to have enough flexibility with a bit of structure in there. But I do think this technology can have a bigger role to play than perhaps it does currently.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for that. That's really comprehensive. And thank you if you put in the chat. Thank you. And perhaps, if you've got any questions, start putting them in there. And also, if you are from a particular area of a law firm or you've got a particular area of interest, by all means, please put that in the chat so we can sort of think about that. So, Andrew, let's talk about the journey from your side. So you started out by trying to cloud enable Visualfiles, and then let's talk about, Visualfiles is an important part of the story still. So talk about tell us from the beginning, Andrew.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Visualfiles still has a very large user base, very successful, adopted mainly in the transactional space where Nick was referring to, so heavily into insurance, conveyancing, debt collection, those kind of areas. In a number of our larger firms, though, even before the pandemic, but very much after the pandemic, it was where we've got cloud, we have a cloud strategy, and your product is client server. So at some point, whilst we enjoy using your product at the moment and it's driving the efficiencies that we need, you need to be able to move it into the cloud. And you probably remember 7-8 years ago, we tried to do that. We tried to do a rewrite on the product. Visualfiles is 20 years old, feature function rich. 20 years old doesn't mean it's bad. It means it's proven. It's very good at what it does. And the clients who have taken it have invested heavily in it. So the challenge was, how do we take a product that's proven, and very much like Microsoft Word, that's been around 20, 30, 40 years. How do we take something that's good and move it into the cloud? So that was our first challenge. And Lexis have a partnership with Microsoft globally. So we approached Microsoft and said, how do we change our architecture so that we can come and deploy in Azure? So that was our initial angle. When we started to do it, we were breaking elements of the product down, able to separate the database away from different layers. And we realized at the time that we had an opportunity to try and develop something a little bit different for the corporate and commercial space. So traditionally in our user base, we may be in a 4,000 person firm, but we'll only be on 1,000 desktops because we're in the insurance area, but we're not in the corporate area. Even in Clyde and Co, I think at the time when we engaged, I think we were on about 200 desktops in an acquisition from Scotland. So we weren't across the board in any shape or manner. When we did engage with Clyde and Co, they would say, look, we like Visualfiles. It needs to be modern, it needs to be cloud enabled, but we won't be putting it on every desktop. And that's where the discussion started. And we said, well, actually, we've been developing something in the background. And we believe we have this light touch matter management solution that we can offer to people via the web, via Azure. It's not Visualfiles, it's a new product, but it can connect to the same database. So it can share the same data store as all your Visualfiles users. So you've still got one version of the truth, but the way that your fee earners and lawyers will interact with the product is completely different. And it's more light touch. But what we're trying to do conceptually is, with all the challenges that clients are bringing, demanding more transparency, demanding to see more MI, what we're trying to do is say, well, look, we've been doing this with case management for the last 20 plus years. Why don't we bring some of those tips and tricks and make them available to you, but in the kind of solutions that you'd actually use rather than a full-blown case management system. And if you speak to Nick and say, would your corporate and commercial guys use a product like Visualfiles, the answer would be no. So, we'd want to appeal to every desktop. And that's a solution that we believe with Everyfile, we're able to say to people, your transactional lawyers can use a proper sawdust on the floor case management system. Everybody else in your organization still requires somewhere to store a file digitally. And if you're using Outlook and Excel spreadsheets and OneDrive, or you've got multiple different systems, that's not ideal when you have all your GDPR and DPA regulations. Where is all your data being stored? How do you have any kind of consistency across your practice? So that's the opportunity that we saw when we began developing Everyfile.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, and I think so you wanted to. It's interesting. I think I've seen in my time writing about legal tech this change from we're gonna just produce it and then people will use it to this concept which is sensible of that this is a challenging area that we're all struggling with. So law firms are struggling with it, technology providers are struggling with it in terms of how do you create particularly this case management system, matter management system up the value chain. There's challenges on both sides, and I like the fact that you said we don't want to just push out this product. We want to get you involved because there's lots of subtleties along the way, which I think would only really work having both of you working on it together and feeding back to one another. Yeah,
I think that's, the value that the relationship has brought. We had a vision for light touch matter management. And then when you scratch the surface of light touch matter management, it isn't that corporate and commercial lawyers don't want technology. To Nick's point, it was, we've been to market, we don't see anything that suits what we're trying to achieve. So to be able to work alongside clients, hear what their lawyers were saying, and know that we've got the experience, our development team's got the experience of building similar solutions, not the same, but being able to deploy similar solutions to actually meet their needs. That was exciting. That's why we enjoyed working alongside Clyde's and Nick and the team. I have to say, as a former litigator, although it was donkeys years ago, I have some insights into the cultural into the culture that you're dealing with, and it's really not easy, right? But it's a very much something that everyone I think knows needs to change and improve for the better. But so Nick, so you were sort of faced with this knowledge that you've already touched on some of it, but you needed to move from this commoditized world to a world where you needed to start. I suppose it is creeping up the value chain, isn't it? But you're not a tech company, so talk us through how you approach the collaboration side of it.
Yeah, I think that's the point right there, is that the need for not just sort of date, you know, not just sort of court date management, but actually increasingly on those outside of that commoditized end, managing potentially we have service level agreements with our clients, a certain turnaround times you have to agree with, and that's not just in commoditized, right? That can go all the way up to complex matters. There's still certain things they expect to see for a turnaround. You still have to gather data and MI during those processes. Now, it's not to the same extent, perhaps, as you gather it in the volume, you know what I mean? They don't ask for the same depth of information, but you still have to gather it. And what you really have to avoid in all these scenarios is that this doesn't become another cost of delivery, right? You've got to try and make it weave through the process of how you're working, so it becomes just part of the work you're doing, right? If you start putting down in a client narrative, you know, collecting data, I suspect that would be rejected in all honesty, because it's not really what, you know, what your services are about. However, it's an expectation of part of the overall service. So what we have to do is find a system that can flex to how somebody is working enough that, as you quite rightly said, you know, it doesn't make you feel like you have to follow a pattern that you need to follow, but actually doesn't just present you at the end of every month with some data screen that you have to fill in that's sort of completely sort of disconnected from the work you've been doing, and you have to go back through. And it sounds very simple when you say it, but actually when we've been working our way through that, is the listening to sort of LexisNexis and what it is you need to build, is you end up with quite complex, there's quite a lot of complexity required of phase and task and activity, and quite a lot of complexity of depth of team structure that you can then apply to these things. Then how do you have tasks as distinct from workflows, and how do you sometimes can bring a robot in but don't bring it in for other areas? And if you almost go back to them and say, we kind of want people to be able to do what they want in the system, it creates quite a challenging tech advantage. We want enough control that we don't have everybody doing everything in their own way, otherwise you end up with chaos. But we have to have enough flexibility so that someone who has run their own practice, has been used to, you know, being in charge of their own destiny, doesn't suddenly feel like, you know, this big sort of monster's watching them all day. And so that's what we've been bringing to life, which is what are the challenges that we need the system to deal with. But I think what the key piece, and where we've given great access into our sort of partners and fee earners, is that user experience. We often sort of, you can have all the functionality in the world, but if the user experience doesn't sit right, you know, none of that functionality will really see the light of day. Indeed, it could even be rejected. So that's what we've been working on.
Yeah, I wonder if it would be helpful just to talk at the, so I've got a question about, but I think it would be great, keep asking your questions, because I think what will be so helpful, Nick, hearing you talk now, is to explain in a bit more detail about, you know, how people are using it. You know, I know you've got, so because I feel like, you know, we can talk in theory, but if you can lay out some of the more concrete details that sort of explain, you know, how from a fee, perhaps talking from a fee earner's perspective, you know, what kind of information are you capturing for what sort of matter when you're talking about outside of the more commoditized volume matters? And then, but keep posting your, I'm going to come to your question. It's a really interesting question. So I'll come back to that in a sec.
From a volume perspective, you have a handling of a litigated, pre-litigated or litigated claim. So what you're doing is, in those scenarios, you have quite a detailed workflow, right, that goes through from receiving instruction to acknowledging the instruction to case file review. And on all the way through is you have to capture quite a lot of detail about the nature of the case. And when I say the nature of the case, it sounds simple. There could well be about 20 different checklists and tick boxes and goodness knows what else to actually identify it, because they're all very, very different down to nature of injury and all those sorts of areas. With that, then, you have this overlay, which is we are not just using Clyde and Co templates, we have to use client templates. So you have to then go through and think about, okay, when you've captured that data, how do you make sure the system knows that for that client, it's this template and it populates the right data into the right area of the template? And then is that particular client something where we can send that out directly, or we have to send it back to the client to check before it goes out? So you have this layer of how do Clyde and Co work? Then you have the layer out, because it's this type of insurance case, there's these sorts of workflows and data, and then you have this client overlay over the top. And that complexity means if you're not careful, almost for every client, you've got different ways of working. So what we've been trying to do in the Visualfile system now is you've got this sort of core workflow and data capture that sits the way through it, with where we can have core templates, we do, with an overlay then of each individual insurance pillar, with then another overlay of the clients. And that's where Visualfiles comes in, because the automation and the sort of robotics that get a lot of that going is really, really powerful. When you move it to Everyfile, I would describe the shift as being from workflowing to matter management, or task management, and that is the sort of the shift that we see. So where we have teams using that system, they may well still be, I'm talking just current insurance space at the moment, there may well still be templates and other things that we have to use, but they're not linked to a hard, fast workflow that you have to follow. They're linked then to individual tasks, which the partners and fee earners can choose to do when they need to do them. Now, certain of those, because I'm sure Andrew will pick up on that question that we've got in the chat there, which I think is the link between Everyfile and Visualfiles. If we need to, we can lean back into the functionality of Visualfiles to automate certain elements of that and bring it back into the Everyfile environment. So you almost, with them, you keep them in this user experience, which is web-based, it's more flexible, it's more this, but where we need to pull it into a more structured environment, we can kind of get it whizzed along in the Visualfile stuff and bring it back out again. So we've got it in the volume space, which is very, very structured in terms of data and workflows and templates, and then we bring it more into a task basis. Where we can't tie all the data points into the task yet, then we've still got some data screens at the end, but we minimize those as much as is humanly possible, because if we got rid of them entirely, you'd end up with a very rigid set of workflows, which is not what everybody wants. So we've got to decide what's going to make people engage with the system.
Andrew, do you want to answer? So the question is, does Everyfile work in a hybrid environment where Visualfiles is on premise? Do you want to take that question?
I can attempt to. My understanding of it is yes, it can. I don't know whether you have to install Everyfile on premise. That's my only. I'd have to check the actual technicalities of it. I believe it can connect back from an Azure instance, but if you're not putting Visualfiles database in Azure, I'm not entirely sure. So we'll have to come back with the answer to that one.
Yeah, we can always come back.
Yeah, I think the piece I wanted to pick up from what Nick was saying is the MI piece, because that's really the challenge you see in a lot of law firms, is the concept of the matter metadata, which isn't easy to say, but where do you store a lot of that information? You know, Derek Southall coined a phrase, the missing middle. So everybody's got, you know, and in the large law, you know, AM500, you're using a Lita Adherent as an accounts package. You're using probably iManage or NetDocuments as a DMS. You may have Interaction or another as a CRM. But where's your matter management solution? Where do you put your contacts and specialists and those kind of things? Where do you store that MI data, the progression through a case? And it's that's the missing middle. And for me, it's quite easy to say, but MI just should be a byproduct of doing the file. You know, you capture data, send out a few letters. In the background, the system should be updating your MI and saying, this has happened, that's happened. Yeah, and you shouldn't be scrabbling around on a Friday with a spreadsheet trying to panically fill out something that for the client's demand. So yeah, the missing middle. And when you talk about collaboration, the solutions have to integrate with those best of breed products. You're not there to try and replicate functionality or replace functionality from any of those solutions. You're trying to complement it, and that's what we're trying to do. We want to be part of that desktop, so it sits with and can speak to those different systems, and then the users, all the end users, have somewhere to put their data. And instead of it being stored everywhere, you now have a centralized digital file that everybody's using in a particular way. And then the interesting thing is you can start to introduce slowly, so nobody knows it's happening, standards across the piece, you know, your actual brand. How do you want people to work? And it doesn't matter if you're Manchester, Nick, or Miami or Melbourne, wherever you are in the world, when you walk into a Clyde & Co office and you want to run a file and request MI, you should be able to get it in a similar way.
I think just to add to that, Caroline, I think, you know, there is now a significant amount of structure around what I would call the regulatory data on a file, you know, because you have to clear conflicts, you have to clear KYC and AML, right? So all the data that you need to capture to make sure those processes happen to the right standard and appropriately is there. There is, you know, understandably a lot of structure around the sort of financial data within a matter file, because otherwise you can't produce a bill. And it is this piece in the middle, why this sort of contextual data, which I think historically is there, right? It's there somewhere, but it's never there in a structured form. And when I think about, you know, where the future may go, the power of that data, when I think about how it would power future sort of analysis tools and those sorts of things about, you know, what is it that caused the file to go that way, or what happened on that particular matter, you know, without having that structured data captured across, you know, multiple matters, it's going to become very hard actually to make use of some of the emerging technologies that, you know, I'm sure you've talked about ad infinitum. It's not the purpose of here is, but all of that comes from having that rich stream of data in the middle. But asking individuals who are already busy, already under pressure, have already got to get, you know, just the solution out the door, to now go and capture a load of data in the middle of it all, it has to be seamless. And that's what we're delivering here, is something seamless, to make sure that it happens as part of somebody's day, not, you know, another thing that they're being asked to do, as well as the thousands of other things they're being asked to do in their day.
I think that helps with adoption, Nick, because what you're actually saying to the lawyer is, you know, we're giving you a way that you're not panicking on a Friday when your client's asking for the data. If you work in this way, that's something that's going to improve your relationship with your clients and going to give them a better level of service and actually make your life a little bit better. So you're pulling people into using the software slowly instead of pushing them. Say, look, this is going to benefit you, it's going to benefit your client, and what we're asking you to do is a minuscule amount of what we might ask some of the transactional lawyers to do, just a minuscule. But if you can behave in that way, it benefits the business, benefits your clients, and after all, it'll benefit you.
I think there's a really good question about engagement, because they do still have to make some effort, don't they? And you know, I've heard some stories about a law firm where all they had to do, you know, in terms of select the type of law, and that apparently this firm, everyone was doing aviation law because it's number one on the list, and they don't actually do aviation. When they were analysing, they were like, we don't even do aviation, but they'd all selected it. But so there's this question: what's lawyer engagement been with the system, particularly, what has lawyer engagement with the system, particularly the workflows, been like since rollout? Have you seen any impact on time recording, billing, etc.?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think this comes back to how not just our work with LexisNexis on looking at the, if you like, the sort of features of Everyfile and what we need to do, but I think it's also how we've taken the base platform and then enabled it to do what we want it to do. And what we haven't done is sort of sit in a cupboard and write a load of workflows and deploy them on everybody. We've actually engaged, and I am genuinely grateful to the fee earners for giving up their time, right? They've given up a huge amount of time to not just go, okay, here's an hour's workshop, is everybody happy, and off we go. You know, we've properly gone, okay, what is it we're trying to achieve? Let's write this thing together. Let's make sure it happens. Yes, there's people like me saying, I don't really think that's the most efficient way we could do this. I think we could do it a different way. But arguably, we've come together to actually say, well, this is a workflow that works for you. This is a workflow that LexisNexis can get built into the system. And so I wouldn't say that every time we have sort of deployed it in a test environment and got people to test it, they've loved it. But what we haven't then done is, well, you know, you're just going to have to use it as it is, and off you go. We've said, okay, well, what are the key things that we need to change? Yeah, we have to keep a return on investment in mind. You know, we can't just, you know, do everything. But we've started to say, well, what are the must-haves? What are the nice-to-haves? And what are this? And we've kept on keep refreshing. We need to get an MVP. We've got an MVP, minimum viable product. We're out there. We're working with it, and then we're going to keep looking at those priorities and keep doing that improvement. And that continual engagement, which probably from the outside world looks like a little bit of overkill, you know, in terms of what you're doing, makes all the difference, because we haven't, LexisNexis, me and my role, haven't just put this on somebody. They feel like it's their system, right? And my ambition in all of this was, it's not Clyde's system, it's not this, it's actually the individuals who are leading those teams feel like it's their workflows, it's their ways of working, but they accept the appropriate challenge, you know, around making sure it's efficient and effective. And you went on to ask about time recording and billing and everything else. Is when we look at majority of these areas, it really is, we look at the speed of the turnaround time. You know, we actually, in those areas, they're pretty good actually around time recording. They have a fantastic CLO who drives a hard world, and the billing is pretty good. What we have been measuring though is the speed of turnaround, which is how quickly can we get stuff out. Because when you're working against an SLA and you've got deadlines, you don't really want to be hitting them, you want to be exceeding them. So what we're looking for is how quickly we can do. And because it's really interesting, Caroline, you said about not just picking aviation and carrying on with it, right? Because the system, if you pick the wrong thing, it won't really release all the things you need. You get a lot more data accuracy. So once you've picked the right thing, right, you're on the right journey then, and so it will keep prompting you as to what you need to do and what you need to do next, and having the right templates, it doesn't produce all the data, it only says these are the data bits you need to collect, right? This is the only bits you need to collect. We're not going to show you the 20 things it could be. For this thing, you only need 5. That speed of turnaround has been really, really important. As we now move into sort of the more complex areas, there it again is about actually being able to do a better job of monitoring those turnaround times, because that's been quite tricky actually, because you've got no real sort of way of monitoring all of that centrally. It's difficult to show your clients that you are actually hitting all those deadlines. You just haven't missed any, and so it's nice to be able to start putting that through.
Do you want to recap in terms of where you are at in terms of the rollout, Nick, just so people are clear, because you've got some pilots going on, you've got a lot going on, haven't you?
Yeah. So in terms of in our volume space, I would say that we are largely deployed now with Visualfiles. And I don't mean, so Andrew talked about the one, you know, many years ago. I'm talking about the sort of revamped version of that. So that's up and running and out there, and there's just a couple of remaining systems. I mean, in the middle of deciding to do all of this, we obviously did a large merge with BLM, but we've managed to squeeze that into the program and make that happen. So I just need to put that out there. We've now got live with our complex claims users, Everyfile. So they're now utilising that system. And the feedback so far has been really positive in terms of how that operates. And when we get to what we're in now, February, May, June, I call it that Everyfile 1, what's going out into our insurance space. Everyfile 2, which is sort of got more features and functionality in it that really push you to the top end of complex law. That's coming, I think, sort of May time. So we're going to get the pilot going with those groups. But with those groups, we've been working in the background to make sure that when it's launched, we've got the right tasks and structures and everything in it. So we're really in that middle ground with Everyfile at the moment, which is where do we need it the most? We need it the most in that insurance space, right, to manage all those deadlines and MI and all that sort of stuff. So that's where we've gone with. And I'm sort of talking about Everyfile 2 like it's a throwaway. That's been like 2 years worth of work with some of our most litigation partners. It's so funny, there's so much going on that you sort of dismiss it, but actually they've been working really hard with the designers at LexisNexis to really start to bring to life what functionality they need and how they need to be able to move things around in a way that perhaps you don't necessarily need to in the insurance space. You know what happens in a long piece of litigation, you were going to do this and all of a sudden you're not now because you've got a curveball that way and you need to be able to move that around, but you've got to be able to do it all very seamlessly. You know, if you the moment you say to everyone, oh, you've now got to change this to make one change, it's not going to happen because too many changes happen all the time. So that's what those guys have been working on, but they're now happy, so we're going to go forward and sort of put that out there in like I say in May.
I think that's a value, Caroline. It's that engagement. We would have never developed the solution in the way that we were shown by the teams at Clyde's, and it's working in these exotic arenas that we've never worked in before, which is quite exciting. Suddenly you're into cyber, aviation, places that you'd never see a Visualfile system, and seeing the the concept of changing what is a linear system, when you think about robotics and automation, about just, get as many cases through as fast as you can to the highest profit that you can make, to we've now got almost like a legal project management solution where you can move everything around. 30 people, 40 people can be working on the same file around the globe. It can last 3 or 4 years. People come in, people leave, but you've got this entire footprint of everything that's ever happened on the file and the ability to see it with a helicopter view. It's some really, really impressive stuff.
I think one of the challenges, Caroline, is that when you take something that's quite complicated, let's take an arbitration, right? So an arbitration could last, goodness knows, 3 years. Hundreds, if not thousands, of, if you were to map it all out, sort of activities and things that need to happen. And the problem with most problem's a strong word, but the challenge with something like Visualfiles is it's quite structured, in terms of what role everybody plays on the file. But if you take an arbitration, the most junior person could be an owner of an entire section of the file in one instance, and in another instance, they're the most junior person on that whole file. And so it sounds really basic, but actually having a system that can enable someone to be in a file, both the owner of something and then actually a junior in other regards, and when you move it around, all those linkages between who they are and what they own and what they do for this, to make someone just be able to pull something down and move it. That's what we've been working on, because the partners have said, if it can do it, have that user experience where I can literally pull things down and it reshuffles the deck and it moves everybody, then this becomes a really, really powerful tool, because they get frustrated with, having multiple calendars, everything across different calendars, with clients wanting an update on where they're at. And that takes a huge amount of time to kind of pull together. If you can have that live plan that doesn't become a thing that you've got to employ on some separate to make that all happen and bring it all together, again, back to the questions around what efficiencies do you see, you're really starting to look at all of the time that you can't charge clients for, right? Or they reject, because increasingly they're saying, well, actually, managing that project, managing all the admin around it, that's not really for us to pay for, right? You've got to get efficient and effective. That's what we've been focused on.
But so they do have that flexibility in terms of, that's obviously quite difficult to achieve when you move into, things happen in a different way each time, the process is different, but you've managed to achieve it so that they can operate in a different way each time, without
that's what's taken a long time.
It's tricky, isn't it?
Because it's really the world's why do I think that a lot of I think there's just a more accepted market structure around a lot of corporate work. I think the market said this is how it works, and I think there's a natural order of events. But I think that in litigation, fundamentally there are two sides having a disagreement, right? So it's unlikely to be linear, is it, that disagreement? And so being able to quickly flex the plan, making sure that recognizing that over the course of 2 years a team is unlikely to be static, right? People get promoted, people leave, people come, that you're not likely, what point could you get a counterclaim, right? And all of a sudden you've got to bring the counterclaim into it, and what does that do for the rest of the schedule? That's really where we've been trying to explain and work with LexisNexis to say, if we don't start to address exactly those points which no one's really tried to address, we're not going to end up with something different, right? I'm not going to end up with something that I can take back to the partners and say, look, this is different. It's not trying to cage you. It's not trying to do that. It's actually going to be additive, to your world. And that's where I think most of the time has gone, I think, Andrew, in just teasing out what are those key bits of flexibility and nuance to those larger matters that you wouldn't necessarily think about when you were thinking about matter management, but for us to be able to reap the benefits of it, because we already have the system, right? We already have it in volume, but what you want to do is bring it across the rest of the firm.
And it's interesting because I think, Andrew, you said that you can start with, in terms of, this goes back to the touches on both points in terms of increasing that functionality, but also the engagement. So you said you could start off with just very basic information, right? Like, so you can start off, almost feels like very light touch, so they can just and then you can flex it, right? It's not one size fits all.
Absolutely not. And then they're just hearing Nick speak there, a little bit like the iPhone. For some people, they run their entire business on it. For me, it's a phone with a bit of internet with my mail on. So, there's tons and tons of functionality that you could get on there. But at the end of the day, if you just use the iPhone, then the business is running one set of tech across the piece. If I choose to engage and only do the internet and mail, that's up to me. For the people that are using it as a camera and downloading, making movies and using Office on there and all these crazy things that I would never think of doing on my iPhone, so be it. So the idea is give everybody a thin stripe, 5% of the functionality, solve that data problem across the organization. We've got a digital file. We're holding all of our metadata centrally. What does this solve? It solves the client demand on transparency and our MI problem. There you go. As a minimum, everybody can do that. And the way we like to think about it is then different departments can come and say, I need a bit more. And instead of being you're going to have to wait, we'll put that on the roadmap, we'll see you in 6 months. We switched functionality off in the first page. So as soon as people start asking for it, you can show them it. Well, let's switch this on. Let's switch this on for you. You're not in a technology cul-de-sac, so we can open this up. And then the banking team may say, well, hang on a second, why have we only got this really basic system when these guys over here are doing something quite special? And so the idea is then they come to you and ask for the tech, not the other way around where you say, here, you're going to be using this. So light touch, pull them into using a very, very basic solution across the piece, solve some fundamental firm issues while doing it, and then open the door up to the people who's put their hand up and say, my client's asking for X, Y, or Z. Okay, we can work with you, we can switch that on. There you go.
Do you see that happening, Nick?
Yeah, I think yes, in simple terms, you see it moving from being, you said before, sometimes the conversation is quite conceptual, right? It sounds quite conceptual. And actually, the more time we spend showing around the patch that, guess what, this is what we built here. And actually, they've gone a little bit further. They've given over some more time to have a look at how they put some tasks in and how they do this and how it works. And you see the sort of light bulb moment. So, Andrew alluded to before is we go from insurance into our other sectors. We're going from volume into our other sort of technical areas of the law that we deliver. And so I've now, as I sit here today thinking about sort of budgets and things for next year, I've got a little bit of a demand problem as I sit today, because you've almost got a world where I think that clarity of, if you can bring together the calendar management with the either because you have to manage data or because you want data to power forward your sort of brand and things into the future, with being able to understand what people are doing and what they aren't doing and where are they up to and moving it round, with actually access to various templates and all those sorts of things. And then if you've done it the right way, it automatically gets saved in the right place in the system. When someone actually watches that in action, they suddenly go, oh, well, I didn't realize it did that. And you're like, there you go, right? So you're kind of bringing it through. So, again, even within larger practice groups, you've got areas who are using it more in depth than others. And then we sort of see them one by one start going. I'm a complete realist, Caroline, right? I'm not going to sit on a big call and say, big mass rollout, everyone took it in 5 minutes and isn't it wonderful, right? We've got it going in a significant area of our business. We've moved it into the other side of that other significant area, and now we see the others starting to adopt it. And I wanted to make sure we had the infrastructure right at that point in time, which is why we've been working with LexisNexis to make sure we had that sort of Everyfile 2, as I describe it, in the background ready to go. And it really is that, how do you start to push this thing through? I think as an organization, we are more receptive to that, sort of get that going and sort of feed off that sort of that want and that need than it is you have some sort of draconian top down, because it's not how we operate.
And I think if you've made the effort to, you live and breathe culture, but I think if you've made the effort to understand the culture and to sort of fit this around that sort of understanding of how lawyers operate, they're probably more likely to want to work with it. Like, I know one of the things that you talked about in the development process was, if you show, when you're looking, whether it be at proof of concept stage, if you show an insurance lawyer something that looks like it's applicable for shipping, they're likely to go, well, that's not what I do, right? So whereas if you've made a lot more effort to think, right, I understand how you work and I understand what you do. I think I see more progress in terms of lawyers understanding how data driven the whole world is, right? But actually part of it is being able to say, well, we've really thought about, this isn't one size fits all, and we've really thought about, and we've spent a lot of time with you, and I'm sure that they really appreciate that engagement, to be honest with you.
I think it's how do you facilitate those conversations? Okay, so you've got the sort of fee earning teams on one side, and you've got our own IT plus sort of LexisNexis on the other. And I've worked really hard to build out what we would call a sort of legal design function. So they are individuals who are all former lawyers. They're all qualified lawyers, and for one reason or another in their life, they've either gone down a sort of process operations path or they've gone down an IT path. Systems, I should say. IT sounds a bit more easy, isn't it? Systems path. And when you bring the power of having that sort of link in the middle, between those teams who can start to actually understand what those requirements really mean, translate those requirements into what that would mean from a functionality perspective. And like you say, taking the time and understanding that, and everyone can see it in their own language and in their own way what it's trying to do, you really do start to bridge that gap that can often exist between a sort of piece of technology turning it up and it being adopted. But with that, comes a whole heap of patience and hand-holding and, working your way through. But it's massively rewarding, actually. And, in terms of keeping on that journey and just keeping going, and you see, the sort of the dominoes start to fall is super powerful.
We've got a question that I should have asked earlier probably, but it's quite an opportune moment anyway. But so what KPIs are you measuring?
Yeah, so well, one, put simply, is we're looking at adoption. We have set ourselves targets for adoption each year, and certainly in the last 12 months we've met those, so we're happy with that. We've set some ambitious ones as we go for the next year. I mentioned one of them before, which is certainly in the volume space, that turnaround times. Really keen to see how we get those sped up, because a lot of that work is commoditized, so that's just really important. How quickly can you go through the system? We have measures of data accuracy, so that making sure that when the reports go out to our clients, you can measure the data accuracy, whether there's any issues with that. When we move outside of that commoditized space, we are really back to those sort of quite core law firm measures. So what are we seeing with the impact of the system? Is it a reduction in write-offs? Because very often you find that you've had to write time off because perhaps things were done in the wrong order, or the way it all sort of happened, or utilization team. And so that's what we measure right across the board. We're also very careful, Caroline, that when these systems, we talk about the rollout and the adoption, but each area of adoption, as we work our way through it, they have to come with a business case. We do that challenge, right? It's very easy to get sort of carried away sometimes with the technology of it all. And it's not that I don't believe in it and the firm don't believe in it, but I think we need to hear from them what it is they think that they're going to improve, by bringing it in. Because if you don't have that kind of challenge, then I don't think you've clarified what are the most important features that you're going to switch on first, and therefore you've not got the ownership back in the team. So I'm not going to sit in this call and necessarily go through what everybody's worried about, because that's a little bit dull. But invariably it will be things like we're worried about deadline management. Actually, we're worried about getting these templates filled out quicker, because they may do something very complicated, but 20% of it, when you break it down, is actually quite commoditized now. So if you could just remove that element of it, then let's get that element removed. Therefore, what they'd be looking for is, instead of that being 10 hours, that's now 4 hours, right? And we get that out the door. So we go from that sort of general, Nick, has the firm's utilization write-offs improved in the areas where we're going, all the way through to these individual sort of business cases where they've said, yeah, we're going to invest in these particular workflows, this style of working, and therefore reduce various metrics down.
Do you think for clients it's going to become, I mean, what stage are we at in terms of client expectations around this? Is it in terms of the more complex area? Sorry, it's the end without having to blow my nose, I apologize. So do you think it's, I mean, at some point it's going to become table stakes, right? I imagine. But right now, where would you say we're at in terms of other clients? It's quite early doors still, but are they sort of delighted that you're providing this, or are they already starting to say, well, this is what we expect? How do we gauge what the client reaction is?
I still think our clients are very much output driven. So I think in some respects that, you know, if they see that, sorry, two answers to that. The first one is it's more output driven, right? So I think that if we're delivering on time with the right quality, I think sometimes they don't concern themselves too much with how it's made. If how it's made is very expensive, then they begin to concern themselves with how it's made. But I think that goes to my broader packages. We start to see now that value for money question, right? It's been coming for years. But the value for money question now rarely sits on its own. It says, how are you using technology to deliver value for money, efficiency, whatever words you want to change that round is. And I think if you were to go 5 years ago, I think it would have just said, tell us how you value for money. The classic response would have been delegation, would have been this, would have been that, would have been the other. Now they're expecting to see how you're introducing various bits of technology to drive that value for money and that efficiency. So I don't think it's going to be day to day that they're asking whether you're, you know, as in, did you use this, did you use that? I think when you're in that overall, how do we ensure we deliver you efficient, effective value for money services? If you don't have a narrative and a cohesive narrative around how you have brought together, as I said, sometimes it's disparate technology, so it's quite hard to show how it comes together. If you can start to show how this sort of digital matter management, if you like, is starting to drive your adherence to the plan that you've agreed with them, the adherence to this, to, you know, being able to, where it makes sense, automate some of the templates. I think it's a really powerful message, really powerful.
Yeah, I agree. Where could we, in the last few minutes, where do you see this going? I know that, what do you think using Everyfile, but either both of you, what's the sort of vision as to where this can go?
I think I'll take it first now. I think from our perspective is we want to target large law firms very similar to Clyde and Co. International law is interesting. With there's an Altman Wheel survey, or I don't know how you say it. Was it Weil? Altman Wheel? Potato. But essentially, it's the managing partners of US firms and what they're saying their requirements are, and 90% of them are saying productivity, reduction in headcount, more cooker approach to legal services, more transparency, robotic users. This has been our bread and butter for 20 years with the sort of Visualfile system. So we're not going to bring all of that into Everyfile immediately, but the ability to be able to drive cost out of a case anywhere in the value chain is what we'll be targeting at. So if you asked me what ROI I would measure, it'd be sort of case capacity, billings. Those are the kind of things that you measure usually to see. Well, look, I put a piece of tech in. That lawyer used to be able to do 30 files. I can now do 50 files. We're now billing, X percentage higher. So yeah, certainly for me, that's the ambition, is that concept of having a firm-wide framework to solve the data problems and put it across your organization, and introduce elements where it's going to have the most value.
Yeah.
I think I would say it's going to be interesting to see the ability to create a sort of single user experience. And by that, I mean partners and fee earners are largely operating in one system all day. And I think at the moment, a lot of systems are so disparate, and how can you, so for me, could Everyfile become an umbrella solution that effectively sends other systems to be engines? It's not that it does everything, but it sends you to the right engine. You do what you need to do there, and you come back in, because that whole end-to-end piece, whereas a lawyer, you log into one system, and that's what you operate in all day. You don't have to go to this system for this, or this one for that, or go over here for that. Actually, it starts to just bring that sort of almost like a tube map. If you're in London, like it shows you how to navigate your way through that. That excites me. And then I think, particularly as you start to see some of the generative AI and AI sort of tools, which are bound to be some standalone things, but how do you sort of weave them into delivery? I think it'd be quite interesting. I'd love to say we're there yet, but I don't think we are. The second thing is, I think on the client collaboration side, I think today collaboration focuses predominantly on how you visualize and share data. I think that's what we tend to look at, and how you share documents. I'd personally be interested to see how you can genuinely collaborate with the client on delivery. So could you have a sort of shared platform, you know, where you're doing some of the tasks, they're doing some of the tasks, but you're kind of working together on it? And I'm not saying that that practice doesn't happen today, but I doubt it's supported digitally. Now, there are other systems out there that support collaboration, but I don't think the same depth as this is what I'm trying to say. Is I think where you're all literally working, it's a slightly different concept, I think, where you're all working off the same automated templates and all sorts of things in a way that's integrated with your main systems. You know, by the way, we have HiQ and all those sorts of things. That's not really what I'm talking about. But I just see a sort of far more integrated world, potentially, whether it's end to end or whether it's up and down the food chain. You know, I don't think that we certainly don't use HiQ as a solution, for example, to run matters internally, right? We have Everyfile with our own document management systems and all that sort of thing, because it needs to be protected. It'd be interesting to see where you could take that.
Yeah. And do you envisage, so I guess a more complex level, are we going to be looking at ever sort of roboticized, for want of a better word, roboticizing the entire process of some of the more complex matters?
I think when you start to break anything down in life, however complicated it first appears, there's very little where there isn't an element that could be standardized, right? Not all of it by any stretch of the imagination, but I do think that will be where we'll all be challenged. You know, you know, I think back to other things. You think about, you know, you used to go and book a holiday, you go in and have a long-winded conversation with someone about booking a holiday. Now, without realizing it, you actually follow a standard process online to book a holiday, right? And years ago, no one would have thought that was possible because you had to do all these things, but there's a little bit of technology, you know, in the background there, isn't there, that goes, oh, I think this is the kind of thing they're interested in, we'll bring that up for them, and is that do it? But you're being led down a funnel. And I think that if we can take the mindset off that because it's complicated, the whole thing's complicated, if we can start to think about where some aspects of that work could be, you know, standardized and routine, I think that's when you start to deliver on that value for money concept. I think you start to move everybody up the value chain, and that's when we come back to rates and all sorts of things that you can get. So I think it's about challenging ourselves on what is possible rather than perhaps saying, well, it's complicated, so it's probably not possible. And I think these sorts of solutions are the beginnings of that sort of challenge of how much you can put some structure around it. But yeah, to go far as saying how much of it you would roboticize is a different structure. In the first instance is one thing, but roboticize, I think, is a second.
I think making it easy is the first step, right? I think making it I mean, okay, fine, we've talked about that cultural thing I talked about, but the aviation, you know, lawyers are inherently sometimes resistant, and I can speak as one, you know, I get it. But I think once you start making it easy and people see rewards, right? Once people, whether that be the, you know, like whether it be because you're always hitting your billing targets or because you're, you know, you're not having to do write-ups or whatever. If you're making it, if you've got good user experience, if you've got it's sort of easy to use and you're seeing rewards and getting good client feedback, I think, you know, that all of these things which haven't necessarily happened start helping you move up that value chain, and so it sounds really positive. I think people are going to have to start dropping off because we're coming to the end of time, so I just don't want to run out of time to say thank you very much. Appreciate your questions, people listening in and joining us. Thank you very much for being here today. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Andrew. It's been really interesting chatting to you. I'm sure this will not be the last time we have these kind of conversations. So thank you, everybody. Appreciate your time. And we'll follow up with, we'll be sharing the recording of this conversation so you can circulate it. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Caroline.
Everyone, bye-bye.
Bye.